Meeting to session. As you know, or may have heard, as of today, March 16th, President Trump has asked us to limit groupings to 10. That recommendation came out prior to us having enough time to plan for that, for this open meeting, and to ensure that we were still in an open meeting. So going forward, as the school board convenes, we will be doing so virtually and making sure we're able to notify the public how they can still coordinate and join in and have their comments be heard, just like any other regular open meeting. So as hopefully we will not need to do that, because our next scheduled board meeting is not until April, and the possibility is that we'll be able to hold as normal. But just in case, I did want to let all of you know that there are plans to do these either via phone or some type of virtual platform. With that, I'd like to welcome the guests that are with us this evening in our audience, and if you would please rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Jason, would you please say the school board norms?
Sure. The board developed norms are to share and respect varied opinions and speak with united voice once a decision has been reached, to prudently prioritize resources in a student-centric manner that aligns with the district's strategic plan, to exhibit a mindset of continuous improvement through adequate preparation for meetings and a commitment to board education, and to commit to assessing board effectiveness to ensure high-quality governance for the staff, students, and community of Jamestown.
Thank you. We have nothing under public communication. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare? With that, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Motion by Roger, second by Steve. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Aye. Motion carries. Moving on into our regular meeting, we have nothing under recognition or correspondence. We are going to move a couple of things around here. So we're going to wait on the superintendent's report and move into board education. So we're going to bring, I apologize, we're going to have the learning management system first. So if you go into your agenda under, I apologize, 3A. We have presentation with us tonight on the learning management system and recommendations. Thank you for joining us.
Right. Thanks for having us. Hopefully that's on. My name is Cody Mickelson. This is Tiffany Hillstrom. Both of us are involved in our district's Teacher Leadership Academy, as well as working here. And we had joined together to work on a project that was something that our district was looking to have some more clarity on. And so learning management systems, we'll get into what that is and talk a little bit about that. And it'll seem fairly timely, as this is something that education is really buzzing to get to right now, especially with the recent events. So we didn't make these decisions with that in mind, but it is certainly nice that this is going in that direction for that purpose.
So our task force was consisted of elementary to high school and just all different kinds of staff members. So you can see there that there were representatives from all walks. And so we made it, first of all, the learning management system is a software application for the administration, documentation, tracking, reporting, and delivery of educational courses, training programs, or learning and development programs. And we decided that we did some research ahead of time, but then also we went and did a few site visits as well.
So this graphic, just if you get a chance to take a look at it, it just tells you some of the different possibilities you have with the learning management system. Oftentimes learning management system gets confused with online education, online learning, and it's certainly a valuable component of that. So if you've heard of Blackboard or Schoology or Canvas or the million others that are out there, Google Classroom is a pretty common one, and Microsoft Teams that we've looked at as well. So we went through a lot of them, but some of the things we were really looking for as a district were ways to extend what we're doing to either different applications, different assignments, or also to students that have a distance between them and the teacher as well. So this is the SAMR model. Mr. Gaylor was part of our group, and he had done some work with the SAMR model. But the SAMR model is a way of changing your instruction to include technology. And so at the bottom, the lowest level would be substituting something, putting that up online for students to do just as it were now. So rather than having your form on paper, your form is in a digital form. There's not really a change in the way you're using it other than the format of it. Whereas if you get all the way to the top, you're redefining what your assignment was altogether. So you start at the bottom, and that's our goal. But this is going to hopefully help with some of the tools to help redefine some of the assignments or some of the assessments in our district that we are currently using. There's a video. We'll let you watch that on your own time, though.
So our goal was to go and we wanted to explore and then adopt a learning management system that we could provide an online portal for the student learning and teacher for professional development purposes, and we were wanting to adopt that by the 2021-2022 school year.
Those are outlined in the district's
Yes.
strategic plan as well, so those are where we pulled those goals from. This was our schedule. Sorry, this was the schedule. We got started in December, and we really wanted to be ambitious about this. The original definition of the project they were actually two separate projects. One was a research component, and the other was a recommendation component. And we actually ended up merging those two into one, because by the time you get through the research phase, you really need the same individuals to make those recommendations. So instead of dividing those out, the other thing we really wanted to stress, going back to that very first slide, was we wanted our staff to feel like their input was valued throughout this, and it wasn't two people making that decision. That's the easiest way for something to get rejected, is just to throw it on somebody and say, here, deal with it. So we felt very strongly that we had a great representative group that was able to go back to their building and visit with their staff and get input on all of the different aspects they were looking for in a learning management system. And I think that quelled a lot of maybe apprehension that we were seeing on the front end. So just visiting with other teachers on how they could use this and would you use it this way was, I think, it was really valuable for us prior to these site visits as well, so we could get information for them based on their questions directly.
And in Mandan, that is where we did a site visit for the Canvas, and in West Fargo, that is where we did a site visit for Schoology. And then also we did have one of our team members give us a little Google Classroom, just kind of like a little update class, kind of like
Yeah.
to kind of show some of the tools if we would want to go in that direction as well. In Mandan, the Canvas is used from elementary to the high school, and their teachers and their technology staff, they were great. They visited with us. They told us the positives, but they also told us the negatives, the growing pains. If they would do it differently, they were very freely shared that with us.
So yeah, Mandan was definitely a more visitation with their tech and implementation team, and in West Fargo, when we did a similar visit, it was a lot more of the instructional staffing that gave us the tour through that. So the two different perspectives on how to implement an LMS were very valuable. I felt in West Fargo that a lot of the teaching staff were the ones to walk us through it. And in both cases, the schools used one-to-one devices. So every student had an iPad district-wide in both locations. And so we tried to look at this from the lens of, we're not there yet, but if we do get there, then this is that, so that's something we'll visit about later as well.
And we also got to visit with students in all of those locations, and they got to tell us what they thought were the great, tools that they got to use and the drawbacks or limitations that they saw as well.
This is hard to read. I didn't give the whole rubric because it is about 10 pages long, but we did have a rubric that we had used to score, or at least land some close scores on the different LMSs that we had looked at, and the rubric was valuable to categorize the type of feedback we were looking for. So even though there are a lot of categories here, we felt like looking at it from every angle was important, and we had a large enough group that we had feedback from every single area here. Some of them were a little more relevant than others, and some of them were a little easier to compare back and forth. But one thing about this rubric was, when you try to compare all of the ones we looked at, some of them just land flat the same. It was just fine. And that's reassuring from the perspective that no matter what you select, you're going to get a good product. And the thing it makes hard is, are you going to get the one that you should get? Because you don't have that differentiation there. These are the things we were looking for as a group. We had come up with some of these as a kind of the priorities. So organizing our course content, making sure it's portable so that if we build it this year, it can be used next year, or we can give it to another teacher if they switch a class load. Personalizing education and the assessment as well. Can you assess in multiple ways? And we saw some really great tools for assessment that aren't available in some of the free versions that we were currently using or had seen. Automating some of the tasks that free time up for giving higher level assessments. So in other words, prioritizing where we spend our time on the clerical end of things. Collecting student work, making it easier for students to hand work in and actually for us to keep it organized and have it available, and then to keep track of that as well. So there's some really great tracking features that tell whether it has or hasn't been turned in. And then mobile device access was probably something that we didn't have to look very hard for. We were actually thinking we would have to make sure that this was working well on mobile. That was actually just something that those companies have already done because they know in order for their product to be valuable to a school district, it's got to be mobile friendly. So we were very pleased with that part as well.
And also another great benefit that we did see, especially in West Fargo, was, well, and in Mandan as well, but there were kids that are working at their own pace within the same class and on different chapters, so they were really driving their own learning and their pace of learning as well. And it also builds in for remediation. If a kiddo is having a hard time, there is a huge test bank of questions that can be drawn from, and so that was a really big perk that we saw as well.
We did do a consensus building activity at the end to determine, we kind of kept it secret on, we wouldn't tell everybody what we were thinking or where we were leaning. And on the final day, we kind of just said, we're all kind of leaning the same way. So it really wasn't even a close call when we had come down to it, although we would say that the question that we asked on our final assessment was, would you be happy if we chose this one? Would you be happy if we chose this one? And it was resoundingly yes for either one. So we feel like our decision is going to be well adopted by staff who see this. But we did decide that we would recommend Schoology based on a number of factors all previously mentioned. And then we also included a little addendum that said with an addition of a tool that Canvas had pretty much built in with an additional cost to it. So they have a studio component where there's the ability to create, edit, and add questions to YouTube videos or online videos. And we felt that that was an important part that was missing from Schoology. We did ask to see if they provide that, but they do ask that you go to a third party on that one. So those are just two things that, that was something we felt was part of the wholesome picture of adopting an LMS for that.
And PowerSchool just recently took over Schoology as well, so that should make for the ease in transferring grades, through Schoology up into PowerSchool.
We do have a video for your digestion later on Schoology if you'd like to see what it looks like. But just to sum up here, some of the future steps that came from this, and one of the things that I reflected on over the weekend as I was writing a reflection about this project was that the number of projects that this project created, it was almost, I don't know, it's like you shouldn't have lifted that rock up because there's so much more to do. But one of the things that our group was overwhelmingly eager to do was discuss how are we going to implement one-to-one devices in our district, because we ultimately think that's going to be the most effective means of using both the LMS, and it's just time to do it. We've kicked this can down the road how much. We put a bandage on everything we can, and we have laptop carts and all that great stuff, and we're not complaining about that, but really this is what it should be. And so that group is going to be spun out of the group that we had for the LMS, and hopefully can come up with something of a recommendation for future implementation on that. So that's what we have for that. We would take any questions if there are any. I don't know what the president.
Thank you for doing that. That was very informative and comprehensive, and we'll look forward to kind of watching those videos a little bit. I think there's a few questions fielding here. So Heidi?
Thank you for your work on this and taking the time to also visit other schools and learn from what they've done. How, and this all sounds really great, how much of price was part of your
That's a great question.
determination of that, and
None.
also with one-on-one?
We didn't actually use price as a, no, we did hear prices from the other schools. We didn't get an exact price on it. We didn't use price as a tool to choose, primarily because we just didn't get that far into it. By the time we would get a quote, they wanted a really comprehensive, detailed look at your district before you do that. Schoology, you could probably take and multiply out the number of students plus a setup fee for the first year. And then Canvas, I'm not entirely sure what they did. We did feel that since there were other schools utilizing both of those LMSs in the state, that cost was something that we would just have to look at as a secondary measure in this part of it. But I can tell you, look, we selected the cheaper one, if that's your answer.
But when we were doing it, we did select what we thought was best for students.
Yeah.
Jason?
So West Fargo is currently using Schoology. And did you get a feel for like the time frame it took for, where are they at in their adaptation of this, and what was their time frame of getting comfortable?
So they're in their third year of actually using it. Is it their second year? First year of one-to-one in the high school? Yeah, it's their first year of one-to-one devices. The impression that I got was that it's, the more devices that you're able to put in students' hands, the more this is going to be used. Organically, students are going to ask you, why isn't this posted here? Why isn't this posted here? And sometimes it's just a limitation of devices. So, to answer your question, I think that it is pretty intuitive once you start using it. I think using it will require it to be worth it. Does that make any sense?
Yep. And then 2 more questions if I can remember them. The student pacing, they were somewhat self-pacing. Did you see that K through 12 or upper levels?
That was mostly in the upper levels where they were more self-pacing, but the differentiation was built in through all. We did not visit any elementary schools in West Fargo, but they also, one reason why I was attracted to Schoology is we can use our Seesaw app and easily add that into Schoology, and so we can use a lot of our existing framework that we have in the elementary, and that can be used there.
And that kind of leads into my last question, because I remembered it. You mentioned PowerSchool would merge. So if we adopt Schoology, is there anything in the district that would not go away, but, make more efficient what we're doing now?
Well, let's put it this way. When we're currently using a number of learning management systems in the district, so it's not that these are unheard of by us, but right now there's a lot of duplication. So if you take grades in one of the LMSs, you now are manually entering those into PowerSchool, whereas you can sync your grade book from Schoology right to PowerSchool. There are a number of analytics behind the scenes. We didn't get into what all of those are, but looking at that information will be very valuable for your instructional coaching staff, as well as just for your PLC and grade level staffs and individual teachers. Will things go away? I hesitate to say things will go away, because even Mandan says they use more paper now than they did before the LMS was there, which is kind of an unusual thing. You'd think it was the other way, but I think it'll be more efficient and meaningful. Yeah.
Dr. Leck, did you have?
I'm just going to comment that the cost is referenced in my superintendent's report as well, and I would say, for a system like this, really pretty reasonable, around $25,000 annually. If you think of K-12 impact, that's a really very reasonable for the type of product you're talking about. And we did ask, we did want to stay away from examining cost at that level. Really, they're trying to look at functionality, and that's really what we wanted to see was the functionality. And I didn't want dollars to draw people to or away from something. We wanted it to be student-centric.
We didn't ask Sally to be part of that.
Yeah, there's a reason why we don't ask that.
Wonderful. Are there any other questions here or on the phone? Jason?
I'm sorry, just one more question. Back to the pacing. So is that going to be a classroom teacher decision? Do we see that being a grade level decision?
Well, actually, I would say it's probably a class decision. Now, the class that we saw that was self-paced was an AP chemistry
Yes.
class. And so that teacher had recorded a lot of her lectures and other things and put those up on Schoology. And then there is a mechanized way in Schoology that until you complete this, you can't access this. And so there is some speed control, so to speak, so that those things are being done and that teacher's checking in with that student. And they're also doing it in that environment. At the elementary level, it was a lot more, either extended activities or activities that could be used for enrichment. And a lot of it is really, honestly, it's an organizational structure for what you're finding online. Because right now it's go to this link, go to this link, go to this link. Whereas you can post that in groups, that makes sense.
Yeah, and for the elementary, it'll just be one login. We don't have to remember 6 different logins with the little kiddos when you're trying to get them logged. It's a one-stop shop as well.
Are there any questions on the phone?
Nope, I don't have any at this time.
Wonderful, thank you so much, and we thank you for your hard work. We will take this strongly into consideration. Thank you. So jumping around again a little bit on our agenda, we're going to go into board education number 1. We're going to have contextual competency PLC's administrative perspective. We have with us this evening Eddie Delzer, Adam Gaylor, and Ryan Hardy. Good evening.
Good evening. So as I'm pulling this up, just a quick comment about the work that the TLA members did on this. One of the things that I think we can celebrate is the process that they went through is the right process to make recommendations like that and to have it be grassroots and well-researched. And so hats off to them, the process that they went through with that, and obviously the learning that they gained from that and the benefit to the district. That TLA is really a great resource that we have, and they did an amazing job. And I think anybody on that list of the committee did enough thorough research on that. Mr. Hardy and I talked about that too, that one of the benefits of that process that they went through is that they can explain to anybody in their constituency, their building, why it was selected and how this is going to benefit kids. And so that's great. So we're going to roll into the PLC process. We're all looking at each other like, which slide is going to go first? But we have 4 things that we really wanted to be able to articulate to the board tonight. You know, why the PLC process, and I think you've heard quite a bit from that, even from teachers, and as we introduced this over the last few years. We'll touch base on how PLC late starts are kind of going at every level, what outcomes we're seeing now, and then where some of those future goals might take us. So John Hattie is a researcher that's well-known in the education world for his research on meta-analysis. And meta-analysis basically is a study of studies. So what are the most effective practices? And he's studied over 800 different sets of studies. So there's, lots of factors that he's considered in learning, and he's rated those in a continuum of what's the most effective practices in education and what's the least effective practices. I know it's kind of hard to see, but the zone of desired effects is on the right side. And then on the left side, you have things that actually negatively impact student learning. And then you have everything in between. So you're striving for a 0.4 effect size or bigger, and that means that that's 1 year's worth of growth for a student. So we're striving for strategies that land us in that zone of desired effects, and we know that the PLC process is the right strategy for us as a district because all of the things that are involved in that process have very high effect sizes. So teacher estimates of student achievement, that's what do we as educators believe about that kid before they even set foot in our classroom? Do we believe and show and hold true to the value of learning for all? The PLC process reinforces learning for all. Collective teacher efficacy, and that's just a shade behind. Do we understand that when we work better together and we work collectively, that we have more impact with our students? So that idea that we can get better and we can get better together. I always like the statement, you don't have to be sick to get better. There was good collaboration happening before the PLC process, but this really enhances outcomes for kids. Self-reported grades, which are only possible if kids know clearly what they should know and be able to do, and that we're assessing and giving them feedback towards those learning goals. Teachers working together as evaluators of their own impact. What that basically boils down to is, are we actually looking at classroom level data and saying, was I effective in this set of strategies? Everybody gives it their best shot when they teach it the first time, but there are still kids that struggle even after our best shot. How do we build into our process the time and the data processes so that we're looking at that and saying, are we getting better? The power of moving from what students know towards explicit success criteria, being really crystal clear with what we want kids to know, and being able to describe what proficiency looks like, and coming to consensus. If Ryan and I are teaching the same class and we have two different versions of what proficiency looks like, that impacts kids. If we come together and we come to that consensus, it impacts kids positively. And then just embracing coaching, embracing the change process, and looking at mistakes as opportunities to learn.
You go ahead. So just once again, stacking in, just the collective efficacy that Mr. Gaylor talked about. Clarity, and just reiterating, we need to know exactly what we want students to know. And across, doesn't matter what school your child is in, that they're, what we want them to know is the same as in Roosevelt as it is in Louise Lamarre as it is in Washington. And this provides time. Formative assessment is how do we know if they know? And I know you guys went through the 4 questions that are covered in the PLCs throughout, but so creating that time to create those formative assessments. So like Adam said, when you break down the data, you're looking at the same assessment, no matter if they had Mr. Gaylor or myself as a teacher, and that's how we can look at the data to see where our students are at. Instruction quality, just time to share good best practices that are being used in the classroom. Boy, your students did really well in the last assessment. What did you do differently that I didn't? Because my students struggled. And just having that time to collaborate and learn from each other what's working. And the response to intervention are MTSS pathways that we have and meeting kids where they're at. I believe this is shown to them.
Yeah, so you guys have seen this as well, that team teaching assessing cycle. And we put this in place just because, as a reminder, we're getting really clear about what kids can learn in a given time frame. We're also having teachers engage in this process and be sure that they're building time in to make sure all students are learning those essential requirements, but then also building in time so that we're enriching students. And there's a specific process that we go through that, so teaching that together in a team enhances our outcomes for kids. What the research says is that this actually feels good for teachers too, because they're empowered to, within the parameters of the process and within the parameters of state standards, to say what's important, what's proficiency look like, what does it look like when we bring student work together and examine that. These are basically, the R is the effect size of how this affects teachers' morale. And you can see that those top 4 up there, analyzing student work, which is part of the PLC process, analyzing student achievement data, developing standards-based lessons, and developing common standards-based scales. Those top 4 are right there in the that have a positive impact on student learning, and they have a positive impact on teacher morale. In comparison to the ones on the bottom, discussing building issues, addressing student behavior, organizing grade level or subject events. Those are not a part of the PLC process. We really reinforce with our staff that we need to be focused on the 4 questions in that time frame, and that we feel better when we do that work, and that we're empowered to do that work.
So why we picked mornings, basically, we went to the PLC Summit this summer, and at the beginning of the day, you talk about what students can do versus what they can't do. At the end of the day, you talk about your struggles always. And it goes back to the last 3, talking about what kids' behaviors that day and things like that. So really, our focus in the mornings, to shift those meetings to the mornings, what the purpose was you're talking about what kids can do. So we have students having the option to come at elementary level. I would say we have 97% of our students show up at Louise Lamarre. Our goal is to continue facilitating activities that students would be engaged in, learning activities. So if, like the first semester, we were able to have enough UJ students to cover 4 of the classrooms, so we kind of rotated them around. This semester, we're down to 2 students, so they take groups in 5th grade and 3rd grade and work with STEM activities in there with supervision of other staff members, paras. And then the other classrooms, their teachers have organized activities that would be a normal part of their day with paras in their rooms. So some are doing math rotations, some are doing brain boost-up activities. So normal learning that would normally occur that doesn't require so much supervision of the teacher, but just more of classroom management-wise. So that's what's happening at the elementary level.
As far as middle school, and in touch a little more about Mr. Delzer, just like students are, earlier we get going and thinking it's no different with teachers. Let's get them collaborating and focusing on student learning in the morning while they're fresh and ready to go for the day versus at the end of the day when they might be worn out from the day. And least impact on families. If we're still open at the same time, kids can get dropped off. We'll take care of that. We want the least amount of impact on families. Middle school, we didn't know what to expect. We truly are in the middle. We thought we would have less students in the morning than elementary, but more than the high school. So we get a fair amount, not as many as we thought we would, but so we're utilizing that. So students that are either need extra help or are missing or late work, we have paraeducators that are there, and we have them in the library working on getting caught up and getting additional help. So if they're here, they're not just sitting there, but we also have games set up in the cafeteria, things like that, to engage students, and it's gone very well.
And then, similar to the middle school, we do an overtime session, so students that have failing grades or have an incomplete in a class then are required to come into that time. And we've got, throughout the year, we've had periods of time where UJ students have been able to come and support that. And then we've got our paraprofessionals available to support student tutoring at that time too.
So I guess one of the first pieces that we needed to get together in making sure this work was valuable was focusing on culture and creating norms. At Louise Lamarre, we have kind of a unique situation that we're only one section, so to bounce ideas off your grade level partner doesn't really occur because we don't have a grade level partner. So we needed to create norms and have an open perspective of what things look like and all buy into the process of, if we're creating a formative assessment for 1st grade, all hands are focused on our 1st grade assessment. We're doing it for kindergarten. So we had to create norms just like you guys have done with your meetings so that everything is established and positive and communication and everybody's input is valued and we're all engaged in that process. So our norms were our first part. I don't know what, but.
Yeah, so in terms of culture, we always say, PLCs are not something we do, it's who we are. We are a professional learning community. It's not just something that we do on Wednesdays, but that extends and permeates beyond that time. And we want those norms and our practices to reinforce that kind of culture.
The focus on learning, I think it's been huge to have instructional coaches in our meetings at those times. We're, again, unique, so we share an instructional coach. So it'd be nice to have an extra instructional coach just to have at our building because she's really able to help. She sees another building, so that's nice because they can come into our building and give us a fresh perspective on what's occurring in other buildings and where students are at in their process and their goals so that we're able to make instructional decisions and things like that and where our kids need to be. So we're lucky in that aspect, but we don't get her every week either. But our clarity of what we want kids to know is, we know where we want our kids to be at with our standard, but I think we're fortunate enough to be vertically aligned because let's say we have Mrs. Hillstrom, our 2nd grade teacher, she doesn't know what to do with her kids that are really low, but that same standard reaches down to 1st grade in a way, so she's able to bounce ideas off her 1st grade teacher, and it really helps our vertical alignment like that, and I've been so proud of, them willing to share ideas and what they do in their classroom, whether it be switching kids through grade levels, just a walk to learn type thing where kids are able to access the content they need at their level during that time. So the assessments, like I said, they're all created with their team members. So at Louise Lamarre, we go K through 2 with either an interventionist or a special education teacher. So we just got PD on creating those assessments. So it was all hands on deck. We created formative assessments on what it should look like in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and then created proficiency scales, so what we wanted students to be able to accomplish, and the guaranteed viable curriculum. You know, we have a curriculum, and it's, for math, let's say it cycles through and it's a spiral. It never really focuses on when students master something, and that PLC process is, you know, more geared on what is non-negotiable. What do we want kids, they have to master before they can move on to that next grade level. So it has to be, we call it the real criteria, but basically it's got to be things that get carried over through different content. So if you think about fluency in reading, for example, you need that in all content areas in order to be successful in school. So we focus on things that have leverage in other content areas and not just, let's say, just math focused or just spelling focused per se. But so.
And the last part was just results orientation, just database decision making. We're basing our instruction and where we're moving on student work and the common assessments that we've developed. And that's the current outcomes that we're working on to drive instruction and best practices in the classroom.
And I've been really proud at the elementary level because for so long, and this is only my second year, but for the last year and a half, I've seen so much of our assessment is the end of learning, and that was their grade, and it gets put in a grade book. And this PLC process really focuses on when students have an error or when they're doing wrong, they're able to look back on that and fix their instruction, give students another chance, and failure is now a part of their learning process, and it's a part of their instruction. So assessment's no longer the end of learning, it's now the part of learning. And I think that, you know, for me to see teachers finally making those instructional decisions and allowing students to practice their skills and not just assess their skills and be done with those has been very impactful. So.
And just to reiterate what Eddie mentioned too, so when we've got 60 teachers at the 9-12 level, and they're meeting in approximately 20 to 30 teams on any given week, for Caroline Thompson and I and John and even Darby to be able to support all of those teams that are on very different levels themselves, that spreads us out quite a bit. This is highly complex work. It's the most professional learning and professional work that can be done. And so to be able to support them in that and just provide them with the resources and be timely and responsive, that instructional coaching has been essential to that. In the future, we want to continue to have that teacher empowerment translate into kids owning their learning, and that it's already changed our culture to have that clarity for students so that they know and they feel supported in the learning process.
Growing use of common assessments, it's a work in progress. Like Mr. Gaylor said, we have teachers that have common assessments developed with their partner, and then there's some that are still working through the process. But that's a future goal. Where throughout the district we have common assessments, so it doesn't matter where your child is at school, they're assessed on the same things, and we can compare data and effectiveness of practices, which results in looking at the data. Okay, what's effective practices are being used? How do we improve our best practices instruction and essentially enhance the learning for all?
Kind of like the TLA members had mentioned with uncovering, you pick up this big rock. I think the same goes for PLCs. A bunch of other things stem from this, and one is standardized grading, and this process should lead to that when really it could lead to that, but that's not our sole purpose of doing so. It's just that we're creating assessments and informing our instruction from that, where teachers are kind of seeing it as, well, we could just as well move into this, which is nice, but that's not our sole purpose for creating or having these PLCs and creating this culture. But it's nice that they can see and connect those dots, that this work could be meaningful in other ways in our district.
So with that, any questions?
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. We've been hearing lots about these PLCs, and we're very thankful for that because it all sounds great, but we wanted some perspective from all of you, and so this is good for us to get your perspective. With that, I'd like to see if there's any questions from the board. Heidi?
I just want to make the comment, I've heard positive things from families about moving it to the morning, and so they can drop off their students rather than those random 1 o'clock dismissals, which then daycare and all those kinds of things. I also, is there a reason Wednesday was chosen for these? I've heard comments from different people like, oh, why not Friday? Why not Monday? Just kind of curious about the Wednesday for the day.
So
Unofficially, I would go with there's less activities on Wednesdays, so people aren't missing, and we usually have school on Wednesdays, where we may not have a Monday or a Friday,
yeah,
I guess.
that was one aspect of it as well. There are many districts around the state that are participating on Wednesday, and for me, when I have one fax teacher or one accounting teacher, the possibility of them collaborating with somebody out of district is definitely more viable on a Wednesday morning. But primarily because and then instructionally too, in that teaching and assessing cycle, having something in the middle of the week where you still have an opportunity to adjust your instruction on Thursday and Friday or to plan for the following week was part of the discussion too. So.
Very good. Any other questions? Dr. Leck, did you have anything? Are there any questions on the phone?
Not at this time.
All right. Thank you all, and thank you for your hard work. Good night. So then we will go ahead and move on.
Can you leave that on?
Oh, of course.
We're going to go ahead and move back into our agenda to letter C. We're going to go to our reports, and as expected, we don't have a student council report at this time, so then we will move to the superintendent's report. Dr. Leck.
Well, thank you. You do have my written report submitted, and I'm going to connect here in just a second. But I'll walk through my report as well. We'll spend a lot of time on a topic, and I know that when you received this written report in the middle of last week, probably one of the most substantial things that I'm sure everybody wants information on, and that's the school closure and how we're reacting to the governor's executive order and how that impacts education in Jamestown. That's a late addition to that written report, and so I'll have some documents that you can peruse, and I'm sure there's some that didn't have a chance to look at documents I added at 1 o'clock today, just because that's not the time that you plan for those to review all that information. So, but first, before we go through that, I just wanted to bring your attention to a few items in that written report. We did later on in this agenda, as you know, there'll be a resignation from Phyllis Clemens. She, as you're aware, is currently the building principal at Washington Elementary. And just a little historical background for those that may not be aware. Mrs. Clemens came into JPS. She was originally an administrator at the Child Adolescent Services Center, CAS. And when that facility closed, because we held continuing contracts for professional staff, we absorbed those. And I'm sure there were some board members, I know there are board members around that were here when that decision was made to absorb those staff. Mrs. Clemens was one of those, and she was installed as the assistant elementary principal at Washington in a shared capacity with Mrs. Combs. Actually, it might have been Mrs. Schmidt at the time, but there's with Mrs. Combs at Louise Lamarre. And so there's a little bit of history behind Washington, how we've dealt with Washington and Louise Lamarre as single section buildings. There's been a few different configurations of how that's operated. I know that Mrs. Schmidt did Lincoln in Washington for a period of time. Vicki Combs did a shared position for a period of time with Washington and Louise Lamarre. I can't imagine Mrs. Schmidt's situation with a single section and a double section building. Much more reasonable to look at two singles, but those are the types of things that we've done. We've had a shared position at central office and an elementary principal. So those have all been configurations that we've worked with those dynamics of having a single section building. And as I mentioned in my report, right-sizing staff is always a difficult conversation because we have a status quo. And we know that this is what we've operated with in the past. But these opportunities when we have, one of the primary things that we can do is allocating human resources. And when there's opportunities through attrition to look at human resources, we have a responsibility to do that. And just wanted to make you aware that that's something that we have to look at and something I'll continue to look at and make some decisions related to human resources and how we're going to operate in that. Are we going to continue to have a full-time position there? Is that going to be a shared position? What is that going to look like? So those, just making you aware that that's on my radar, and we'll be making some decisions related to Washington Elementary. I shared with you a governance mindset blog post from Peter DeWitt, and it actually ties into a book that I've read that I'd be happy to share with you. I reference that later. For those that know me, you know that Michael Fullen is somebody that I am very attached to as a researcher. He is probably the world's foremost change agent in terms of how do large organizations change. He wrote a book recently with Davis Campbell related to school boards and the governance mindset. And I wrote these out, focused on 4 components in this blog post, and that's referenced in the book: systems thinking, strategic focus, deep learning, and public manner. And I just want to point out how proud I am as a superintendent to look around at all of you as board members and say, these are things that you're doing, working on, and striving to improve. Systems thinking, strategic focus, deep learning, public manner, those are all things that you have taken a very proactive approach to addressing. And I just want to call that out and make sure that you're aware that this is good work. The work that you do, I know that it is difficult, and I know that the extra focus on governance makes our meetings go a little bit longer, and it takes a little more planning. But it's good work, it's important work, it's work that impacts teachers, staff, students, and parents in our community. So thank you for that. I just wanted to bring your attention to it. In terms of an LMS, you heard from Cody and Tiffany related to the work that they've done, and it was 3 or 4 meetings. Adam, was it 3 meetings, 4 meetings?
2 visits and 3 meetings.
Yeah, okay, so 5 total times that they got together and worked on making a recommendation. And I won't go any further into that. You heard a lot from them already. You know what the cost overall is, and just making you aware that this is a group that did great work, really had the best interests of our district and students in mind. I think the cost is very reasonable, and the budget I present to you for next year will include a learning management system, and their recommendations of Schoology is certainly the direction that I would go. I wanted to draw your attention quickly to an open enrollment waiver, and we talked last time about how open enrollments and tuition agreements work. One situation or potential situation that I neglected to mention was those that move into, they have immediate access to an open enrollment waiver, and so I just explained that situation out. I have been working with North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders to compile some data on school construction and referendum, school referendums. I shared that just for information. I thought there was some pretty interesting points that came out from there. I listed a few of them out there just for your review. We're absolutely not alone as a school district in saying, boy, we need to go out and update our facilities. This is happening across our state, and you can see the examples, and especially those that have done it in the recently, and those that are doing it that are planning to do it in the next 3 years. We are not also alone in failed attempts. There's been a number of districts that have seen struggles, especially recently. In fact, the ratio for success has dwindled as low as 50% recently, and it was much higher prior to that. The success rates were much, much higher at the beginning of this decade than they are currently. Not surprisingly, construction costs are are regional. Regionally, they differ regionally, but they're also on the rise. The comparable cost per square foot, when you look at those districts that have been able to pass referendums in the earlier part of the decade to those that are looking at it now, they are substantially higher now. Again, not a surprise, but that is something that you see. And we are not alone in seeking out a building fund expansion. About 10% of districts in North Dakota are considering this concept currently. So I think we are have been on the right path in terms of the process, and we're certainly not alone in some of the challenges that we see. But I wanted to bring that to your attention, and I think there's some really interesting, good information in there. And before I get into school closure, I'll pause for questions.
Jason?
Just real quick, do you or the NDCEL, do they attribute the increase in denials to the square footage pricing or the construction pricing, or is there a trend that they see for reasoning?
For the cost increase?
For the failed referendums as the decade has gone on.
I think you see the limitations in a greater or less of you see the ceiling of the tax impact is really what I think is the biggest driver. And that could have something to do, I mean, obviously there's connected to construction costs, but I think you see as the decade has gone on, people have gotten, those tax rates have continued to increase. The mills have continued to increase, and I think you're seeing people are at the point where they can't support tax increase any greater. And as we all know, we went through challenges at the state level with they called level funding, but actually decreased funding, and that's been a big challenge because schools have had to recoup those differences, and that becomes borne on the back of taxpayers locally when the state doesn't provide that same share. And so when you look at that, as well as an increasing mill levy rate, people get to the point where they say, we've had enough. And I think those are all pushing it to, we've had enough.
Heidi?
Along those same lines, has there been any serious discussion to use portions of the legacy fund or no interest loans out of legacy fund, or even bringing back the sales tax? Our high school was built with about 75% sales tax. Any idea that some of those different types of taxes to be used for it?
Yes to all. Legacy fund, although I'm sure there'll be legislation. I know there's been discussion on legislation to access legacy fund earnings for school construction. And there has been discussion as well about should sales tax be that loophole was closed after Jamestown and Williston built schools partially through sales tax because it was viewed as that should happen through property tax. There's been discussions. Again, I don't know if that's going to turn into legislation. I would say it's very likely that it'll be strongly discussed, that mechanism will be an option too for school districts. I should say in partnership with the city. We can't levy a sales tax, but there would have to be a joint powers agreement with your city.
One more question with the learning management is the idea, and I know we just got the presentation now and we're looking at trying to fit that into our budget, but if it's something that we're going to start next fall, is that kind of what we're thinking? And then is this something that teachers are fairly familiar with, or would there be, like, what type of training, and is that part of our budget, the training costs?
So yes to all. The thought process would be that in the initial year, you would use it for professional learning. So teachers would be introduced to it on the student side. They would not have the responsibility to necessarily create lessons on their side and utilize those, and it would be a slow burn, so to speak, a slow implementation. And of course, training would be an aspect of that as well over time. And I know Schoology has already provided us some information on what we could do to start that process now to get training. Now, with what I'll talk about later with school closure and potential for online planning, there are aspects of virtual education that Maybe we would expedite, depending on how long closure happens, how fast we can get people up to speed. There's other free, it was referenced by the LMS folks earlier, like Google Classrooms that we would probably try to leverage first. But we might have some early adopters that are a little bit more interested in moving forward a little bit more quickly. And if we move forward with Schoology, I was already agreed that we could access that for the rest of this year. So, but yes, implementation is a big piece of that. Training is a huge piece of that. But our initial plan would be to start using it as a professional learning tool and then build it into instruction for students.
Hey,
I just wanted to, I know I've had a lot of questions about this, but I am in favor of it. But I just want to know costs and what kind of impact it'll be on our district. So thank you.
Roger?
One quick question on the LMS. I mean, the $25,000 annually, that does not include the devices, or it does?
So it's the platform. It's what we would access. Yeah, it's not a device. It's the platform you would access through the device.
So we currently use, what's the system we use for grading?
PowerSchool.
PowerSchool. Is that, we pay for that platform as well, or is that something that's provided through
Through the state.
Through the state. So would there be a possibility of the Schoology being provided through the state since Blackboard has maybe merged with them?
No,
Okay.
that'd be our individual cost. That'd be great if they would, but I don't see that happening. I'll focus on getting days forgiven before we.
Maybe with online platforms becoming a necessity, that may change, but we won't know. Also related to the school referendums, something that I think is important for all of us to be mindful of, that when our next legislative session comes around, there has been talk of introducing a bill to limit when or the number of times a school district could ask their people to vote on a referendum. So more to come from our legislature on that, and something that we all need to be mindful of. Are there any questions or comments on the phone?
I have one. Wanted to express concern over having a shared principal at two different buildings. I know financially it makes sense, but I just feel that it adds a lot of stress on that principal who is splitting their time between the two buildings, as well as the staff who has to pick up slack when there's not a principal present. And I think that the students just behave a lot differently when there is not a principal on site. So just concerns that I wanted to express on that.
Thank you, Melissa. Anything else? Dr. Leck, do you have any further comments?
Just the school closure.
Okay, and so then we'll continue on in our superintendent report.
So related to the shared principal, those are all factors that we consider when we make any change to the status quo in terms of staffing. I do think we need to take a hard look, and I absolutely understand that point, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to move to an individual principal in that building. Even after Mrs. Clemens was in the district, she was originally an assistant principal, and we wanted to make that transition to a full building principal to eliminate some of that shared. But again, we'll look through all those factors, but we do have a responsibility now to look at human resources and how to best service and most reasonably service all kids in the district, and human resources is a big part of our budget. But that's something we'll continue to update on as we make some decisions there. Related to school closure and planning, and I don't think it's any surprise that about 7:30 last night, there was a press conference from Governor Doug Burgum. He made an executive order to close schools for, at a minimum, through the end of this week. So not a lot of time for us to plan for how to react to this kind of closure. Really an unprecedented situation, in not just in North Dakota, but what's happening across our country. North Dakota is not alone in closures. the vast majority of states now have continued to close schools for periods of time, 1 week to 3 to 4 weeks. I think 3 weeks is the longest that I've seen so far. So we are not alone in this decision. I will say that it's a challenge to plan on short notice. And even if we had more notice, this is still a challenge to plan. It makes it a little more interesting when it happens late on Sunday night, and we're preparing to not have students the next day. And how do we communicate with people? How do we communicate with families and the staff that we have in place? And that's been a challenge. But I'll tell you, I could not be more proud of the administrators, the team that we've had making plans for this next step. These are people that, in many cases, were here as late as 11 o'clock last night. People that got here early, spent the whole day with me in this room, walking through action planning and how we're going to react for full staff when they come back on Wednesday, how we're going to react for students moving forward. And so lots of ambiguity. We talked to them earlier today, and I'll tell you the same thing. There has to be a tolerance for ambiguity. We don't know what's going to happen a week from now. We don't know how all of this is going to play out, nor does anybody. I think if anybody could tell us how that would go, that would be great, but it still has to plan. I mean, there is just a lot up in the air now. And so we created a plan of action that I just want to show you a little bit, and I'm not going to go through each piece of this. The one thing I want to tell you before I forget is that on our website, we've now put in an update center. So if you go into school updates, and I'm just showing it behind us here, it shares all of the important information that we've already shared out to our families, and all of the messages and other resources that are available through the CDC. And so it's going to continue to be a clearinghouse place where you can go to get information related to what we're doing as a school and what is out there for support from all of the agencies that know far more about this illness and the contagious situation than we do. We're educators. That's our focus. We aren't healthcare providers. I'm not an epidemiologist. We do have one on the board, but I am not one. And so this is a way for us to kind of gather the specialized information and to share it out the best that we can. We all know communicating is a huge piece of moving forward. And so any little thing that we can do helps in that area. So just to point that out. This is our starting document that we've done, and I shared this to you earlier, or at least through the report. And if you didn't have a chance to see this, I'll just reference that this is an open source document. And so if you make any changes or click any buttons or erase anything, it's erased for all of us. So just be cautious. We want to keep this because it's been a lot of work that we've done. But really, our plan associates around two components. And that's really what our charge is. And that's how do we safely reopen? And that goes from how do we ensure that we clean and disinfect to what are our social distancing strategies and other mitigation strategies that we're going to implement when students come back. That's all there. But we also have to plan for how can we educate virtually beyond this week, beyond whatever time period or whatever comes next for us. Is that another week after this week? Is that 2 more weeks after this week? Is that the end of the year? We really don't know, and that's that tolerance for ambiguity. But those are our 2 main responsibilities right now, is how are we going to safely reopen, and how can we plan for the education that's going to come beyond this particular week. And we feel very strongly we need to have plans for all of that. And so the guidance from the governor's office was, well, bring essential staff in this week. But you determine who essential staff is. And that's, of course, going to look different in Drake than it does in Jamestown or in Fargo. That essential staff looks differently. And we're all going to attack this differently as schools. And we wanted to be fairly comprehensive about that. And we felt that our focuses were around some of the daily operations. So we wanted to make sure that central office staff was here. And we have a business office, and they need to be fully staffed and operating. But communication, cleaning, and planning, those are really where our focus is for Monday and Tuesday. And we know that essential staff might vary between Monday and Tuesday. We said our secretaries, we wanted all of them here because that is the main line of communication for patrons. When they have a question, they're going to call their secretary, they're going to call the office, and we wanted people there. And we also wanted them to be available to communicate out if we had that necessity. Now that might mean we have a secretary or secretaries or individuals that don't have a lot of communicating to do, but we need them there because they might. We need them there because a student might show up and not get that message. And if our administrators are down here having a planning meeting and we have a young second grader out sitting outside of Lincoln Elementary, somebody needs to be there. And we don't want to have that building without any connection back to the administrator who's here. We wanted to have all of our administrators and directors here because I asked them to be here for planning. We have, of course, all of our custodial staff are here, and we want them to get a jump start on all of that work that will need to take place to safely reopen, the disinfecting and the cleaning, assessing supplies, things of that nature. Who am I missing? I feel like I'm missing a group. Directors, administrators, directors. So that's who was here on Monday. After our meetings today, special education is also, special education director. So after today, as we met as a group, we felt we also are going to ask counselors to come back on Tuesday to get a jump start on some of the planning that'll need to happen around that group as well. So Wednesday through Friday, we're asking that all staff will report for Wednesday and Friday. And again, that could change. We're continuing to plan, and this is as we joke around in our planning sessions has been, they get sick of me saying the same thing, and that's, hey, this is a fluid situation, and we have to continue to work through what's changing. And that's just the reality. It's changing all the time. We're sitting in a meeting, and we get guidance from 50 to 10 in terms of large groups, and we have to react to those things really pretty nimbly. And so this is all continues to be something that's fluid and changes constantly. So that could change too. But we're asking all staff to come, but some of those job responsibilities might change. We have paras that come, and of course, they might have a responsibility to work with a one-on-one student. Well, we don't have students, and they aren't here working with a one-on-one student. But there's work that we need to do that can get done. We might ask people to help with disinfecting. We might ask for people to help with their inventory and making purchase orders, things of that nature. Just whatever we need to get done gets done. I will say that we made the decision for those hourly staff that have not been asked to come in on Monday or Tuesday, we're still paying them. So they'll continue to get paid even though they aren't coming into work. Again, that's the right thing to do. Right now, we are getting funding from the state because of our longer day. We've talked about our days to hours legislation and how that changed the game for us a little bit. That also means that we're currently funded at a full level, and if we're doing that, it seems reasonable to me to continue to pay those people during those times. Now, I will say that unless the governor does forgive those days, eventually we're going to run out of those days. We aren't going to have that, and then we have different decisions to make. And so we do have limitations. I couldn't stress strongly enough in the conversations I've had with other superintendents and North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders, our legislative focus group, who I serve on, that our number one priority has to be those days should be forgiven. Given our situation and the really abnormal nature of what we're dealing with, the only solution that makes sense is for those days to be forgiven. And I feel very confident eventually we'll get to that decision, but we aren't there yet. But I think it is something that we need to continue to push that be strongly considered. We want to be able to take care of all of those staff, and full funding is a piece of that. Because if we pay for those staff now and we're asked to extend into June, we're going to absorb that cost too. So we want to maintain that full funding, and like I said, a waiving of instructional days is a very reasonable response that I think will happen over time. But we discussed some guidance, which you can see I'm not going to go through. One of the big pieces for today was, as I'm sure you're aware, the CDC, North Dakota Department of Health, has outlined different risk levels, low risk, moderate risk, high risk. And we tasked the administrators with walking through at each of their levels. We wanted to make sure that any staff member could walk in on day one and say, we know what our expectations are in terms of how does this change my job. And so at each building we wrote, I'll just give you one example of I'll just open one up and so you can see it. This is the high school's staff guidance, so they can see, okay, when Dr. Leck says that we are in a low-risk environment, then a staff would be able to look and say, okay, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know that this is how student lunch is going to be operated. This is what we're doing with monitoring absenteeism. This is what we're doing in terms of what am I responsible for cleaning? What is the custodian responsible for cleaning? I know what's going to happen when a kid is sick. All of those things are outlined at each of those levels: low risk, moderate risk, and high risk. And so we wanted to make sure that was a huge piece for us, that we wanted to make sure that every staff would know exactly what their building looks like, regardless of risk level. And so they completed that. Then we also went through and created different action plans based on classification of people. We highlighted the secretaries, food service, special education, custodial staff. We created an action plan for technology because we know greater conversation needs to happen there in terms of if we are going to access technology for learning outside of the classroom. Professional learning, of course, is a piece of that. How we're operating activities and what mental health supports exist as an action plan. I'll just show you an example, which was mine, the custodial. So these are all things they have that we are going to get completed throughout the course of this week. They have, just again as an example, one of the tasks that we know that we need to do is providing example schedules for each custodial staff member. And we want a building principal to go through their building and say, okay, here's my hot areas. These are the areas that we need special focus on. These walls up 3 feet, and this group needs particular attention. They all need to be washed, but this wall or these two walls are the worst that we really need to focus on. How are we going to deal with this particular water fountain? How are we going to do this? So the principals in their building, they're the ones that know. And so we want to create that list of deep cleaning and disinfecting items at each building, but then also give a schedule for what each custodian is going to do. That's one example. Building secretaries, because the custodians are cleaning right now, we've asked those building secretaries to create an inventory on custodial supplies and help us restock those through purchase ordering, things like that. There's lists. We could spend an hour talking about some of the work that this group has done already, but you get the sense of where we're at. And again, we're meeting tomorrow. I know that the different principals have different meetings throughout the day. We're meeting at the end of the day again to bring everything together and to come to consensus on what Wednesday, Thursday, Friday looks like for all of those staff members, and potentially reassess. Is it Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Is it maybe Wednesday, Thursday that we want people here? And again, things change, and we have to look at, we don't want people to come here and not have enough to do. We want to make sure that when they're here, that they're working well and they have the information and the resources that they need to move forward. That's where we are at, and I would certainly stand for questions. I'm sure there's more questions than there are answers, but I'd be happy to answer the best that I can. I will say again, I think we've got to start an awfully good plan, considering where we started from at 7:30 last night. There's been an awful lot of hours that have gone into creating a coherent plan and creating next steps. So again, with a focus of how can we reopen safely and how do we continue to educate if this extends beyond this week.
Dr. Leck, thank you for this comprehensive look as to what it is that our district was able to complete in a very short amount of time. As you mentioned, this is an unprecedented event, nothing that we've ever asked of any of our districts to ever do before. And you took it, the recommendations and the guidelines that were out there provided to you by the Department of Health and the CDC, and you really, you heeded them correctly. As I look through this, you're looking at high frequently touched surfaces, how are we going to get those cleaned, and when we are able to reopen our doors, if COVID-19 is still circulating in our nation, how can we ensure the safety of our students and our staff, continue through maintaining those high levels of decontamination, essentially, is what you looked at. So I'm very happy to see all of that happening. And like I said, this is something that you've never had to do before. The next piece, of course, and we'll hear more from the governor by Friday as to if we need to figure out how to teach our kids at home. And I'm sure those will be some of the conversations that you maybe start having as well. With that, I'd like to open the floor up to the board for any questions. Jason?
So, are we asking any staff who may have been out of the state within the last 2 weeks to report Wednesday?
So the Department of Health doesn't really have any recommendations for domestic travel, but there is recommendations for international travel. And so if we have any staff, teachers, they need to follow the recommendations of the Department of Health, and that will, if they submit the online form, it will give them guidance as to what they are required to do. And then that form they can share with their employer to let them know what the health department has recommended to them.
And we have made that form available and reiterated that as well.
As the situation evolves, you may see domestic locations also added. The Department of Health did update their website with some domestic locations as well, and that'll become more available statewide. Any other questions from the board? Jason, did you have another follow-up? Okay. Okay, sounds good, Jason. Are there any questions or comments on the phone?
Yeah, just this Bob.
Yes. Well, thank you for, so some of the things, food service was one of our action planning items for a reason, just as Mr. Toso, you outlined. You know, there's a lot of different things that we need to consider. Are we looking at a delivery point? You know, that students come in, are we looking at delivery out to students? What exactly does that look like? And is there a drive-through? So to speak, for delivery? Is it all of those things? Those are all things that I know that Shelley Mack, who was part of our planning process, has already been thinking about, as well as what do we do when we have limitations for well, at the time when we discussed it was limits of 50, and how do we make that work in a classroom or in a lunchroom setting, and now you're talking 10. You know, because originally we were talking if it gets to a certain risk level, and you'll see that represented in the staff guidelines, then we would move into feeding in classrooms. Well, of course, with this guidance now, that would be, you know, well, we're closed. So I would assume that would be lifted before it's closed, before we open up again. But all of those things are things that we need to consider in terms of food service. Little things that you may not even think about. We have a lot of self-service. Salad bars or self-served at the high school, for example. Well, all of that would have to change in the guidelines that we've created. We'd have to go to more where the staff is serving versus self-serve. Little things, but they're things that make a difference in terms of spreading of contagious illness.
Heidi?
I have one more question, Dr. Lester. Do you have any negative pushback from parents or anybody in the community about maybe this being an overreaction to closing the schools since we only have the one case in North Dakota at this time?
You know, I really have not. I have not had any conversation outside of thank you to those that have to make these plans, a recognition that we're in a real tough situation. That's what I've heard the most of, is just the thank yous for the situation that we're in and how we're opting to move forward, that we're being proactive. That's really what I've heard from the staff that has reached out and the community members that have reached out. I have not heard about overreactions, although I certainly don't doubt that there are polarizing opinions and perspectives out there from lots of individuals, those that say exactly what you said, boy, we've only had one case, you know, how do we get here, to those that say or believe that we should have done this 2 months ago or a month ago. You know, the reality is you know, we're fortunate to have agencies that this is what they do for a living. And they make recommendations, and we have executives that work in government that they're, you know, this is their job to make these kinds of decisions. And my job is to react and focus on education. And so whatever decision they make is the one that I'm going to make, and is how I'm going to react. And it matters less about the judgment on if it's necessary, but I don't have time to deal with this. Is it necessary? I've got kids to educate, so you know, that's where we're focused.
The food piece reminded me, I believe the food pantry at the middle school, just, this is for public's information, I believe the food pantry at the middle school is open. And Ryan, they just come to the front office and, yep, okay, good. And so they're restocking the shelves, and so for our public, for our students, if they do need some food items from the food pantry during this week, that they can just come to the middle school, and someone will be glad to help them. So thank you.
I had every intention to bring that up, so thank you for bringing it up. We'll actually, high school and middle school, have food pantries. Those are open for students, but also community members if that is a need. So we certainly have those available. I think it's one of the really, really good things we've done in the last couple of years is access to those food pantries through the Great Plains Food Alliance has been really a fantastic thing. And as a reminder, that is funded partially through our Hot Lunch Counselor Fund that a number of community members have generously donated to, and that's been a real benefit for our students.
Heidi, did you have more?
What about the freezers? Are they accessible also in the grade schools from the daily bread freezers and the middle school and high school?
So we had that discussion earlier today. Yes, they are, but when we don't, those continue to be. Food comes from our food service, and so when we don't have hot lunch, those don't get restocked, and so they are available. But if there's not food in there, and the food gets to be a certain, it's been in there so long, it needs to get culled, and so we certainly still encourage people to look in there, but in some buildings they may not have any. Like the middle school, you don't have anything in there right now. It's empty. Other schools may have, they're all dated, and but some of that does need to be culled, I think, as this extends along. But so people should continue to look, but it may not be open.
And if anyone in the community would like to donate toward these food pantries or keeping these things filled, they can just call the central office, and they'll be told where they can send their check. So thank you for the community for the support of this.
Jason?
I know we've talked a lot in this plan, and we haven't looked at it in detail about should we reopen, or when we reopen and safely, having a safe environment, I'm assuming that we're also planning to carry on academically for our kids. Should this be a can you just share a little bit about what's being done on that? Are we in good shape?
So that's part of this planning week. We have to determine what that looks like. And that's part of the conversations that'll happen Wednesday, Thursday, Friday with staff. And there's, I hate to continue to say it, but there's a lot of ambiguity. We haven't gone through this before. We haven't been asked in a day to plan education for 2,100 students virtually and figure that out in a week. We haven't been asked to do that before. And, at different levels, at different buildings, different school districts, there's all different levels of capacity for that. Had we had a learning management system in place for 4 years, for example, this conversation might look a little bit different. We would likely have better capacity for that. If we were a one-to-one school, we might have a little bit better capacity for that. But we are operating with the tools and the resources that we have. And so that it looks different at every building. What I can tell you is that I know that our administrators, our teachers, and our support staff are going to do the very, very best they can to make sure that education is the priority for these people, and they're going to do the absolute best that they can. What that looks like at an early elementary level, what that looks like in a high school level, some of that is yet to be determined. This isn't something we were planning for. If it was, we would have a real defined plan of what that would look like. But it's something that was thrown upon us, and we'll adjust and continue to pivot as we need to get it done.
Any other question or comment for Dr. Leck? Again, I just want to applaud our administrators for coming together and being true leaders and showing our staff how to persevere through this. We will come out on the other side of this, all of us, we will. We just need to be flexible and understand that all of the information, it's coming, but we have to be mindful that we don't have all the answers. This coronavirus wasn't known about until 3 months ago. Things are fast evolving. We've always said to plan, you make sure you have emergency operation plans, which our district has had. And those emergency operations plans are about staffing and what do you do when you have a lot of staff out and how do you do cleaning. I don't know if the plans have ever said, what do you do if the school is closed for 3 weeks? So this is new.
On 12 hours notice.
On 12 hours notice. So this is new area. So thank you. With that then, I think we'll go ahead and move on into our agenda. So as we've skipped around a little bit, we'll just kind of start here on E. We have nothing under old business, so we'll move into new business. We have nothing under activities or building and grounds, so then we'll move into curriculum assessment and instruction. We've had our education on learning management system, so we will move into letter B. Can I have a motion to approve the 2020 summer school courses? Motion by Jason, second by Roger. Any discussion? Jason?
Just quick, are there any changes to that, or are they pretty much status quo?
It's pretty much the same as it has been. I think there might be some changes at the high school based on need, but has there been any change there? A little bit?
We're offering creative writing, which is something that kind of comes around every couple of years with sufficient involvement to do that. And then offering credit for SAE, the supervised ag experience, as well, which is something that has been done in the past, but hadn't been done for a while.
So just so that people heard, Mr. Gaylor let us know that there were a couple of classes that were in addition, but nothing completely new. There was creative writing that will be offered this summer, which has been offered in the past, but hasn't been for a little while. And then also the ag. Supervised ag experience had also been offered in the past, and that is being reinstated. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to letter F, can I have a motion to approve the 2020 summer school salary and fee schedule? Motion by Roger. Second by Steve. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the school nursing agreement with Central Valley Health for the 2020-2021 school year? Motion by Roger. Second by Jason. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. And we have the general fund balance sheet for us to look over. Are there any questions or more information for us, Sally? Any other questions? Okay. Then moving on to letter D. Can I have a motion to approve the end fund balance recommendation? Motion by Roger.
Second.
Second by Bob. Any discussion? I would like to offer that I appreciate the plan as to where we want to go, but not getting there instantaneously. So I do like the phased-in approach. All those in favor? Oh, Amy has asked. The goal for the district is to have an ending fund balance of 13% of their budget, of the budget.
Previous year's expenditures.
Of previous year's expenditures. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the monthly financials? Motion by Roger. Second by Melissa. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Moving on to number 5, personnel. Can I have a motion to approve the hiring of Megan Ramage? Is that how you say it? Ramage, as the middle school ELA for the 2020-2021 school year. Motion by Heidi, second by Roger. And any, Dr. Leck?
Just some comment. In the past, I've done a little bit of insight on the new staff that we're bringing in, and I'll be honest, I was a little overwhelmed with other things, so I didn't do that. And so I just share a little bit about Megan Ramage. She is a UJ student, elementary ed background, also has some concentration in math and science. She has most recently done some student teaching at Washington Elementary, as well as some work in Valley City. So she comes to us right from UJ, but we know that she's done an excellent job in that student teaching experience, and she was had interviewed very well. I know the committee was very excited to bring her name forward.
Jason?
So we are adding an ELA instructor. No one is leaving, or?
This is, we had a staff transfer and filling that position. So we had a staff transfer in from literacy into this, and so we're just filling that position.
Any other questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the resignation of Linda Kessler, Title I teacher at Washington Elementary, at the conclusion of the 2019-2020 school year? Motion by Roger. Seconded by Heidi, with a sincere gratitude for her service to our district. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Can I have a motion to approve the resignation of Phyllis Clemens, principal of the Washington Elementary, at the conclusion of the 2019-2020 school year? Motion by Roger. Second by Heidi, with a sincere gratitude for her service to our district for these many years and to education as a whole. 40 years, that's something. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We have nothing under policy and procedures. Oh, no eye test for me today. So no, we have nothing under tuition. So moving into other, again, the election review, that is there for your information. Sally, would you like to also give the public a reminder?
Reminder for the upcoming election for the school board. The deadline for the candidates to file the intent with the business manager of Jamestown Public Schools, deadline is 4 p.m. on April 6th. And then the drawing for the name placement on the ballot will be conducted on April 8th, 4:15 at the central office conference room. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any items for future agendas? I would like to just reiterate that we will probably have COVID-19 updates as needed on future agendas. That may become something that's just a part of our meetings. And as
It's a
I
fluid
mentioned,
situation.
yes, yep, so we may or may not. And also that because of that may or may not, some of our future meetings may be held virtually, and we will make sure the public has a way to join us so that it remains accessible to all. With that, then, currently we have some future meetings scheduled, and they are still standing to be held. We have the District School Improvement Committee meeting on Thursday, April 12th at 3:30 here in the Thompson Community Room. Our next regularly scheduled board meeting is Monday, April 6th here at 5:15 in the Thompson Community Room. And board members, don't forget to do your superintendent evaluation and to right-click on your adjournment to assess the meeting. With that, our meeting is adjourned.